I mean, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? Why am I doing this? What the hell is going on? I'm officially placing Trump in the unique position that I've only placed one other global leader on, the Vladimir Putin insanity position, okay? That's it. Officially, I'm done looking for reason behind his actions. I'm lying, but goddamn. Holy, that is so crazy. Yeah, look, the thing is, I will say this much, okay? Part of the reason why I'm not anti-tariff across the board is because I do think that it has the capacity to beef up domestic manufacturing, okay, if done correctly. If it's managed through unions like the UAW, for example, and they play a big role in how manufacturing can be increased, for example. I just don't trust the Donald Trump administration to actually actively give a seat at the table to the UAW, though. I think it could be done correctly. It just can't be blanket tariffs across the board for each individual nation. What he's doing here is basically breaking the toys that America benefited from for years and years and years. That's all he's doing. Trade negotiations that he actually renegotiated. The USMCA is the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement is literally NAFTA 2. Donald Trump implemented that. Okay? So when he turns around and he's like, yeah, I don't want it no more. What I find very strange about these decisions is that these are negotiations and agreements that benefited America and the American consumers, often at the cost of American manufacturing. Clawing that back and reshaping American priorities and reshaping American manufacturing in this way is not necessarily a bad thing in the long term if done correctly. But of course, as is the case with Donald Trump, he's not doing it correctly. I don't think that he's doing it for a good reason. I don't think he's doing it to improve American manufacturing. But to be fair, I also don't know what he is trying to do anyway, because so much of the Trump administration is just genuine insanity. Yeah, we'd have to do China level central planning to actually reindustrialize. Just doing blanket tariffs makes no sense. I know. The craziest thing that watches the left is who was in the streets in the 90s and early 2000s against these trade agreements. Yeah. How do you think he's going to get out of it? I don't even know what the hell he's doing. I've just never seen a right-wing administration behave like this. Like I've never really, even liberal administrations now don't behave like this. I don't think it's like a repolarization happening in the two American major parties. I don't think that like Trump is now actively trying to bring back American manufacturing and create strong labor unions for Americans. Like, I just don't think that he's doing that. Because if he was doing that, he would not be actively destroying the administrative state. He would not be actively destroying the administrative state while simultaneously, yeah, this is from 2 months ago. Hold on, there's a newer version of this that I believe he did a couple days ago. I'm going to watch this instead. Yanis Varoufakis, former Greek finance minister, friend of the show, one of my favorite bald men, is on Ranakolic's Dispatches on BT, Breakthrough News, talking about what possibly could be the reason for why Trump is doing all of the things that he's doing in terms of tariffs. Let's take a look.
And it is a rational plan. It is a well thought out plan. For me, it is a terrible plan in the sense that it works against the interests of the majority of Americans and against the interests of the majority of humanity. But we need to understand it before we fight it. And the liberal establishment are like headless chickens running around in the hope that somehow Trump is going to fail as a result of not having a plan. He's not going to have to fail because he doesn't have a plan. If he fails, he will fail because there will be people and movements that oppose him who understand his plan. So I just wanted to make this clear.
No, it's important. It's an important caveat. Yeah.
Okay. So what is the plan? To begin with, to understand his plan, we have to understand his main gripe, his main discontent regarding the state of the United States. The vast majority of people around the world, and that includes me, we believe that, and I think we're not wrong to believe, that the United States has an exorbitant privilege, and that is the US dollar.
The US dollar and the US markets. Okay? America is an incredibly wealthy nation, and that's why even the poorest Americans, in comparison to like middle class people in Europe, for example, are still, when compared on the global marketplace, have a lot more purchasing power, right? Like that's why sometimes people will say stuff like, "Oh well, you know, Alabama's like a wealthier than England," right? Like people say stuff like that all the time. Now, and that's true. There's truth to that. Your PC is totally freezing up? No, everything is fine on my end. What ended up happening, I think, is a site, like a server side issue on the Twitch side. Might depend where in the EU.
US dollar is the only kind.
Credit card debt is not purchasing power? Yes, it is. You're wrong. It quite literally is if you are someone who's selling goods in the American marketplace. It doesn't matter if it's being purchased with credit card debt. What matters is the money that you're getting. That's it. That's it. That's literally, like, I understand where you're coming from, because it doesn't, that is precisely the reason why, if you simply look at GDP and if you simply look at purchasing power, you kind of fail to recognize that, like, Americans on average have a way worse quality of life than Europeans on average do, because European states at least like create a comfortable barrier of security and offer some social safety nets that Americans do not have, and that they have to purchase in the private marketplace. This also then feeds back into the GDP, ironically enough. But in terms of selling goods into the American market, in terms of selling goods to the Americans, it doesn't matter if they're buying it with credit card debt or not. If you're a manufacturer of goods and you want to enter the American marketplace, you don't care if they're buying it with credit card debt. You don't care if they're buying it with predatory loans. Okay, you just care about them buying your goods. Okay?
Into the world that is in demand independently of what the United States produces. So the only reason why you want the British pound is if you want to buy something produced in Britain, or if you want to go to Britain as a visitor, as a tourist. Nobody else wants pounds, really. Maybe for speculation. Right? But I'm speaking to you from Athens. When I put gas, petrol in my motorcycle, right? Even if it is a Greek company buying petrol from a Greek or a French company that has purchased crude oil from, let's say, Libya. So there's no American corporation involved at all. That act of purchasing gas for my motorcycle increases.
Fix your PowerPoint, bro. I think, Chatter, I think it's a you issue. I think you're gonna have to refresh. The stream is, I believe, fine for everyone else.
The demand for dollars, because oil is denominated in dollars. So that's exorbitant privilege of the United States. It's what allows, as I was saying before, the Germans to keep selling their net exports to the United States, the Chinese to do this, the Japanese to do it, and how this is all recycled through Wall Street, and it becomes rents for the rentier class in the United States. It becomes rents for the bankers in Wall Street, and so on and so forth. But Trump, while understanding all this and loving it, he loves the fact that the dollar has these exorbitant powers for the United States ruling class, and he's one of them. Nevertheless, he sees this exorbitant privilege also, or primarily, as an exorbitant burden. From his perspective, he's a nationalist. He doesn't like the fact that the United States can no longer build nuclear submarines because you don't have an engineering sector anymore. You're not producing enough steel He once said back in the 80s, in 1982, 83, I saw a quote from him, that if you don't have steel, you don't have a country. And America is not producing steel anymore in any substantial quantities. It's China primarily, and also Germany. So for him, this exorbitant privilege, which he adores, comes with the exorbitant burden of effectively shrinking the United States. But then he has also an economic theory behind it, which leads him to conclude that this exorbitant privilege is not going to last long, that carnage will come to the United States. And I don't think he's wrong on this. His argument is this. Now, why does the United States have such a large trade deficit vis-a-vis Germany, Japan, China, and so on? Why is it that the market doesn't work? Because if Paul Krugman and all the other liberal establishment economists were right, that markets work to equilibrate through demand and supply prices, interest rates, and exchange rates, the dollar should have fallen because America has a trade deficit. Every country that has a trade deficit, its currency comes down. But why is the dollar not coming down? Because it has this exorbitant privilege, because people want it for other reasons. But from the perspective of Trump's team, not just Trump, but he has a team of economists around him who are not dodos, who are, quite smart. They may be evil, but they are smart. And what they realize is that that's their thinking, that's their analysis, that the reason why the dollar is not coming down is because the central banks of the foreign countries, of foreigners, foreign central banks, hoard dollars. Now, why do they hoard dollars? Because dollar is the reserve currency. Yeah. So when Germany sells cars to the United States, you have all these dollars going back to Germany. And what happens with these dollars? The vast majority of them, the dollars that are not returned by Mercedes-Benz to New York, they are hoarded by the Central Bank of Europe. Similarly, by the Bank of England, by the Bank of Switzerland, by the Bank of Sweden, by the Bank of Japan, by the Bank of China, increasingly. Right? $3 trillion is held by the Central Bank of Japan. $3,000 billion. That's not to be scoffed at. And why do they hold these dollars? Why don't they convert them into their own currency in order to increase economic activity? Because this is how they preserve their currency at low levels. Because when you hoard these dollars, right, then the value of the dollar vis-a-vis your own currency goes up, and the competitiveness of your export sector is enhanced. And therefore, Trump says, you see, the foreigners are taking advantage of us. We are gifting them the reserve currency, which keeps their currencies down and keeps their currencies backstopped. Instead of holding gold or whatever, diamonds, they're holding our dollars. And in so doing, they are disadvantaging our exporters, and they're advantaging their exporters who are importing into the United States. And this
is why he's mad at Japan. I mean, this is why America historically tanked. This is initially why America tanked the Japanese economy as well, which is like how in the 90s Japan went into turned into a multiple decade of I mean, still to this day has experienced stagnation, because if it's super cheap to make goods in Japan and then sell it to the American marketplace, also super cheap, then obviously that is, it's just something that, it's something that America is not going to be fond of. If the US dollar is strong, exporting goods out of USA is hard because importing country needs to buy strong, i.e. expensive USD.
For you have the US trade deficit. Okay. So
does China do this as well? Stockpile US dollars? Of course. Every country does. And yes, China does as well.
Here comes the story about the tariffs. Now, conventionally, liberal establishment economists think that Trump is an idiot because he can't see that tariffs can't work to eliminate the US trade deficit. Their view is, and this is not wrong, where they are wrong is they think that Trump doesn't understand it. He doesn't understand it. What the story is that, yes, you slap tariffs on Chinese aluminum, or Chinese plastics or Chinese clothes, right? But that will increase the price that American consumers have to pay, and that will jeopardize America's economy because it will push inflation up. But that at some point is not going to eliminate the trade deficit because as this happens, the dollar will go up. And as the dollar goes up, in the end, American consumers will not be paying more because even though they will have to pay the tariff, the dollar value will have gone up. So what they pay in Walmart is not going to be greater. Now, Trump knows that entirely. I've read policy papers that are circulating amongst his team, and they know this precisely and they love it. You know why? Because that's...
No way Trump understands all that. No, it's not Trump that understands it. It's, guys, just like Joe Biden didn't run the American government unilaterally, Donald Trump is not running the American government unilaterally. He has a bunch of people around him that are telling him to make these decisions because they are setting what they perceive is going to be the future of the American economy. That's it. You think Donald Trump makes these decisions on his own? Of course not. Like, that's why Project 2025, I don't know what that is, when he was saying stuff like that, it was always ridiculous. Of course, he gets all of his notes from the Heritage Foundation and the American Enterprise Institute. Yes. And it's not just Elon Musk. There's an eclectic group of people that have similar goals and similar interests, which is like advancing the interests of capital and undermining the administrative state. And some of them might be at odds with one another in terms of like how America should do trade in the future. And that's a pretty significant disagreement. But ultimately, right now, as it stands, all of these guys are just holding on. Okay? They recognize that America is dying. It's a dying empire. And they want to pick apart the scraps. They're not necessarily known for long-term thinking and stability. Capital owners don't really think in decades. They think in quarters. They think in quarterly earnings reports, which is precisely the reason why they're like, all right, well, if America's dying, we might as well, pick the corpse apart for scraps while that is happening. Republicans making the money they didn't make in 4 years that they weren't inside the White House through insider trading? Not necessarily that either.
How they will get foreigners to pay for the tariffs? Because if, here it is, something that they state explicitly in their policy papers. We slap tariffs on them. Their central banks will immediately reduce their interest rates to absorb the recessionary shock to their own economies from our tariffs. As they reduce interest rates, their currency is going to go down, the dollar will go up. In the end, the import prices, the prices that Americans pay will not have changed much, but something will have changed. The trade deficit will not be eliminated, but one thing will have changed. The foreigners will be paying us money. They will be paying for the tariffs. And that for the US administration, for the Trump administration is great. Not only will they be collecting the tariff money, but remember, Congress, and particularly the House of Reps, has the purse strings for tax receipts, but not for tariff receipts. To increase the amount of money that the US government gets from the American taxpayer, Trump has to convince Congress. And there he has a very thin majority, and there is just bedlam. He really doesn't want to have to negotiate with Congress.
I thought the prices were supposed to go up. Is that not true? No, I think it will. I mean, that is in the short term, I think that prices will go up. Having said that, however, this is Yanis Varoufakis trying to say that there is a reason for why Donald Trump's administration, like, he's trying to figure out what could possibly be the logical reason. And it's one of the only explanations that I've heard thus far that at least like have some semblance of logic associated with it, that there is a reason for why he's doing this. And that is that he considers the power that the American dollar has a major issue with American manufacturing. And there's obviously truth to that as well, right? And that if he by way of implementing these tariffs, he wants to force other countries to make their goods more expensive so that the American manufacturing comes back and other countries actually buy from the United States of America. But in the short term, this will absolutely harm the American economy as it stands.
But the moment he slaps the tariffs, the stream of money goes to the Treasury without any negotiation with Congress. And indeed, he can actually even spend this money. There are some legal impediments, but we know how much he respects those. And that's phase one. Nothing has been accomplished by the end of phase one to bring down the US trade deficit. He has increased his Treasury stake through the tariffs, and he's made the foreigners suffer and pay for it. And now comes phase two, which is a grand negotiation. Then he says to them, and this is not novel really, Reagan did that to the Japanese in 1985. Reagan gathered everybody. If you have ever heard of the so-called Plaza Accords of 1985, he gathered the European central bankers and so on, but primarily he had the Japanese there, and he put them under their thumb and said, similarly to what Trump wants to do, you're going to revalue the yen, or I'm going to slap tariffs on you. Now, Trump first slaps the tariffs and then says to the Chinese, to them, to the Germans, to the Saudis and so on, you are now going to revalue your currency. But how? You're going to take a chunk of the dollars that you're holding and you're going to sell them. That way, you are revalue, sell them, for your own currency. That way, you will revalue the euro, the yen, the yuan, and so on. Alternatively, if you don't have that many dollars, and the European Union, the Eurozone doesn't have that many dollars, it is the Japanese that have more than $1 trillion and the Chinese who have $3 trillion.
Yeah, Yanis is right. When you slap tariffs on countries, countries will reduce their interest rates to protect their industry, so their currencies will go down against the dollar. Hence, the tariffs costs will be absorbed by those countries instead of the U.S., and prices won't go up. Maybe. I do not understand is that for that to work, factories and offices have to build first in the U.S. for this, and not only tax incentives have to be created, but bank loan and bank advantages have to be implemented. I think you're not fully understanding him. The price of the dollar goes up on the global market in the end, making foreign goods cheaper in the end while still getting tariff money. I do not foresee the price of goods immediately coming down or even staying relatively stable while and then maybe in the long term creating a big boon in manufacturing, especially because in the short term this will literally lead to layoffs, like mass layoffs in general. The chatter is wrong. When the US dollar increases in value, that means our exports are going to go up in price and the trade deficit will not close. The US also relies on non-substitutable goods abroad. Yeah. If you have, like, when it comes to raw materials, like, there is no substitute. What are you supposed to do? You know what I mean? If we just don't have it here, what are you supposed to do? He's not doing any carve-outs whatsoever. Maybe he will down the line, and I don't understand it. Or maybe he's signaling that he might do that, but he hasn't said anything about it. It just, like, doesn't make sense. Commerce Secretary Lutnick, Trump may roll back Canada and Mexico. I'm done. I mean, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? Why am I doing this? Why? Why are we doing this? What the hell is going on? What a goddamn clown show. Okay, I'm done. I'm officially placing Trump in the unique position that I've only placed one other global leader on. The Vladimir Putin insanity position, okay? That's it. Officially, I'm done looking for reason behind his actions. I'm lying. I will always still try to find a logical reason why he's doing the things that he's doing, even if I disagree with it. But goddamn, it's just like, it doesn't. April Fool's ass tariffs. The goal isn't entirely to bring manufacturing back to America. When the Canadian loonie goes down in worth and the American dollar gains value, America can then purchase the same Canadian products, lumber, etc., at a lower price since the American dollar is stronger. One day, just like your suspension, yeah. Donald Trump pulled a classic HasanAbi bait and switch. God damn, dude. Holy shit.